Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
You can tell a lot about a company by where it invests. At ConocoPhillips, we're investing in Arctic science and engineering at the University of Alaska Anchorage. And we're supporting today's students and tomorrow's engineers at UAF. In fact, today, more than 100 of our employees are University of Alaska graduates, and our future is in their hands. We happen to think that's a pretty good investment. ConocoPhillips, Alaska's oil and gas company.
The National Weather Service.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 11th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with our latest weather information, whether that's satellite and radar views, the current weather conditions there in your neighborhood, or you just want to map that out on the internet. Or if we've got watches, warnings, and advisories out for your community, you can do all of that easily online by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You'll find us on Twitter. Each National Weather Service office in the country and in Alaska is on Twitter. NWS Anchorage, NWS Juneau, or NWS Fairbanks will get you there. U.S. National Weather Service Alaska is on Facebook and on YouTube, and so is this show. At the end of the show, a little bit later, you'll be able to catch the entire broadcast there on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com and type in the search bar AKWX-TV, Alaska Weather TV for short, you'll find the entire broadcast and those of previous days. Or you can find this from our broadcast partner through whom you're watching this show right now, alaskapublic.org. You'll see that on the right-hand side of the screen if you scroll down just a little bit. So a lot of ways to get the same information all day long. Hazardous weather situation right now. We're going to start in southeast. It's been snowing in southeast and in places that it hasn't snowed a whole lot so far this season. A winter storm warning in effect right now for areas across the southern inner channels. Some places there could see upwards of 3, 4, 9 inches of snow, maybe 10 inches of snow up around Hyder. A winter weather advisory surrounding the inner channels, and that goes for Craig and Klawock, and again areas out toward Hyder as well. Places like Ketchikan and Annette, though, under that winter storm warning. Looking farther north, a winter chill, winter chill. It is winter's chill, but it is a wind chill advisory up around the White Pass area. Looking for values there, it could drop to 35 to 40 below with the winds continuing there. That'll go through at least tomorrow. And a winter storm watch now posted for the areas around Icy Cape, Cape Fairweather, including Yakutat. Wait for this one. You know it's Yakutat, so you know it's not just going to be a little number, right? It's going to be kind of something like 16 inches of snow possible there around Yakutat. So Yakutat's getting everybody snow in South Central that we haven't seen for a while. But it is something to watch because as the storm is circulating right here around the Gulf, a little bit of a change in the position could change the amount of snow parts in South Central could see. But for right now, it doesn't look like anything that's creating a winter storm watch or advisory criteria right now for South Central Alaska. So let's look a little bit further north and into the interior where winter weather advisories are posted. For the Beaufort Seacoast, a blizzard warning has been dropped for you. The Brooks Range there on the north and south sides and out around Bettles there. It looks like blowing snow and light snow accumulations will be possible in all of these areas, but more wind than snow than anything else. Looking far to the south and west across Bristol Bay communities out toward Bethel and the Kuskokwim Bay, we're dealing with blowing air, moving air, wind, and the effects it has on how it feels to your body. This is a wind chill advisory then for southwestern Alaska, and it looks like many areas there could be dealing with winds from the north about 15 to maybe 25, maybe 30 miles per hour, gusting to 45 miles per hour, and already with cold temperatures, that could produce a wind chill index anywhere from 30 to 45 below during the day. And at night, that could make it feel like anywhere from 40 to 50 below. So again, a lot of wind moving through southwestern Alaska, and it's already cold. With that, we expect it to feel even colder and perhaps dangerous to your body. Here's a look at the west and out across the Bering Sea and the North and West Pacific. We're watching a stream of moisture go all the way up the Asian coastline into eastern parts of Siberia and into the Gulf of Anadyr. We've got a northerly flow coming down the west coast of Alaska, several waves of low pressure working their way into the Gulf, but none of them really close enough to do any snow operations just yet. As you look at the satellite view, you'll notice that northerly flow coming down through the Bering Strait. That's going to help move some of the ice a little bit further south and perhaps grow the ice a little bit. But one thing that's counterbalancing that, the sea ice program tells us that the winds, the faster they move, the slower the ice actually can grow sometimes. So a little bit of a balance going on there with the cold air moving southward. The ice edge may not progress necessarily as fast if the wind were just a little bit more still. Across the rest of the state, you'll notice in southeast this huge swirl here just west of Haida Gwaii. Low pressure is sitting here combined with a frontal boundary parked right across the central and southern parts of southeast. Perfect recipe for big snow. And as this shifts a little bit further north in time with another wave of low pressure just outside of Prince William Sound, it's a great setup for snow in Yakutat. So we're thinking that the possibility there once again could bring as much as 16 inches of snow across some of the coastal parts of the northern Gulf. Looking across the northern parts of the interior and across the Arctic coast, you can see another wave developing here, moving across Kotzebue Sound late this afternoon. As that frontal boundary is working over the Brooks Range, it will squeeze out a couple inches of snow there, but it'll mainly be a wind issue, blowing and drifting the snow around and, of course, creating some dangerous wind chills for you as well. Moving through the interior, not a whole lot's expected to happen. You might see a flurry or some scattering of snow showers, but it doesn't look like there will be any sizable accumulation in the next couple days. So high pressure, once again, sitting across the Yukon, helping to stir up the air across southeast, but combining that with lift from low pressure across the eastern Gulf and southeastern Alaska. Pretty good recipe for a snow machine down there. Low pressure is working across south central Alaska. The air is just so dry. We've seen a scattering of clouds today, not a whole lot else. Cold fronts dropping across the Brooks Range, bringing with it a few scattered snow showers, maybe some flurries, but most likely wind, and high pressure sitting south of the central and western Aleutians, guiding that northerly flow all the way down the west coast. We saw a few snow showers around Nunivak Island and also around Dutch Harbor earlier this afternoon. Tonight, the front will park around the Brooks Range. Low pressure scoots in a little bit closer to Prince William Sound, and a frontal boundary is parked right across the southern parts of southeast. Again, really not a whole lot of change in that situation. Snow will continue to fly there, and a little bit of light rain, maybe mixed with snow across the western parts of the chain. Mostly, it will be the wind moving southward across the Alaska Peninsula, creating an opportunity for a little snow there, and most likely rain as we head into the central and western parts of the chain tomorrow. Low pressure moves in just a little bit closer to the northern parts of the Gulf as we head into Wednesday afternoon. That low is only around 983 millibars. It's strong enough to keep the breezes going through the Cook Inlet region and through Shelikof Strait, but the main focus should be on southeast again, with the potential for accumulating snow to continue there. Across the interior, a few scattered snow showers are possible, but it doesn't look like any sizable accumulation as high pressure is working its way southward toward the Arctic coast. Areas of fog may develop anywhere from Barrow out toward Kaktovik. And by Thursday, high pressure is trying to settle the winds down along the coastal sections, but as you get into the interior, you notice that pressure gradient really starts to tighten up. So once again, the winds are moving down the Cook Inlet and through Shelikof Strait, through Prince William Sound, and low pressure just south and east of Homer and Seward will continue to bring in that onshore flow into Prince William Sound. So we expect snow there. And for places like Yakutat, of course, if they're going to make it up to 16 inches of snow, and for southeast with continued opportunities for snow accumulation there. Some of that may begin to mix in with a little bit of rain and snow as warmer and wetter air is drawn in from the south, but we have a continued northerly flow across the west coast with likely light snowfall occurring in parts of the Alaska Peninsula in the central and eastern sections of the chain. Here's a look at temperatures today. Pretty cold across parts of the Yukon, Copper River Basin, 11 below there at Glen Allen, and about the same there in Fairbanks around 4 o'clock. Teens and 20s for most of the Kenai Peninsula, including areas around the Anchorage Bowl. Single digits there for Talkeetna, 20s for Prince William Sound. Teens and 20s for most of southeast. Ketchikan and Annette, we're nudging up on the 32-degree mark there. Not terribly warm at all. Anywhere from 5 to 15 below for most of the interior. The Yukon Flats were showing readings at 27 below in Fort Yukon, 11 below in Anaktuvik Pass, and 15 to 25 below across the Arctic coast. Kaktovik, one of the outliers, at 7 below. 8 degrees above in Nome today. Shishmaref was showing 2 below. Around Bethel and the southwest coast, most areas there in the low to mid-teens. Nunivak Island, 14. About the same there in Bethel, 13 degrees. 16 to about 20 degrees around Bristol Bay, including King Salmon and Dillingham. Teens and 20s for the northern parts of the peninsula. Out around Sandpoint, it was 30 degrees, and the farther south you went, it got a little bit closer to freezing, even above for the central and western parts of the chain. Overnight lows tonight will drop to 15 to maybe 30 below in some cases. Northway and Eagle even colder, 40 to maybe 45 below. Northway, I believe, was one of the coldest spots last night at 45 below. Fort Yukon, 29 below. The Arctic Coast, 20 to 30 below. Nome looking at sub-zero temperatures as well as most of Norton Sound around Unalakleet, 8 below. Temps in Bristol Bay may go sub-zero as well tonight in some cases like King Salmon, 3 below. Kodiak above with 21 degrees there on the plus side, 20s and 30s for the Alaska Peninsula and the chain, with South Central looking at highs tomorrow once again in the mid to upper teens. Kodiak 26, southeast mid 20s in the north, low 30s probably in the south, with some of the inner channels holding on to temps in the upper 20s. So again, a good recipe for snow there. The interior stays well below zero, about 5 to maybe 20 below in some cases, like Northway 26 below, 17 below at Fort Yukon, Bettles, Allakaket, and Ambler all looking at temps closing in on 20 below. The Arctic Coast 20 to 30 below, including Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse closer to 30 below. Southwest single digits and low teens there, with the Alaska Peninsula closing in on 30 degrees. False Pass, Cold Bay looking at temps closer to 30, and Dutch Harbor about 34 for you. Flying weather then, MVFR conditions are expected across parts of the interior ahead of that frontal boundary working its way in, the Chukchi Sea, and a large part of the Bering under IFR conditions, including the Pribilofs, with areas in the Gulf looking at MVFR. Your pass conditions show some of the worst visibility around Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass starting out at IFR tomorrow. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as Rainy and Windy Pass, should be mostly VFR. We'll see MVFR conditions generally on the north side of Windy Pass. Elsewhere it should be okay. Isabel Pass should be VFR. Same goes for Mentasta Pass, Tanita Pass, and Porter's Pass, all looking to be VFR. Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to remain visual. Freezing levels show warm and wet air jumping into the western parts of the Bering, but all of Alaska generally is below that surface freezing line, so you can see very cold air is taking over the region. Icing potential generally below 5,000 feet, and again, it's going to be snowing there, so visibility probably not so hot. Below 5,000 feet as well for the eastern parts of the chain and southern sections of the Alaska Peninsula. So why so cold? A huge dip in the jet stream sitting in place, guiding that northerly flow right out of the pole and right into your backyard in the west coast and across the interior, with more of a southwesterly active flow for the southern parts of southeast. 9,000 feet, we have low pressure situated right across southern Alaska with a northerly flow in the west coast, southwesterlies 30 to 35 knots onto the southeastern coastline. Lighter winds here at 3,000 feet. The strongest winds right around Norton Sound, around 45 knots, with high pressure across the Beaufort Sea coast, and more of a west and northwesterly flow crossing over the Aleutians from 30 to 40 knots. Turbulence potential is there north of Norton Sound into the Seward Peninsula and the Chukchi Sea coast below 3,000 feet. And across southwestern Alaska, there will certainly be some gap winds as well if you're flying in the west, especially below 6,000 feet. Watch for some occasional to widespread moderate, and look for some chop there across the northern parts of the Gulf and in the vicinity of the low pressure system near Haida Gwaii. We'll be back with a look at your marine weather forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay with us.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Back in the mid-1800s to early 1900s, the western Arctic waters were filled with ships in search of oil. But not just any kind of oil, they were looking for whale oil. This was a risky venture for ships back then, with dangerous storms and moving ice to battle with, but the potential for making a profit outweighed those risks, and for a period of about 65 years, the western Arctic was an economic resource for young United States. And now there is a movement underway that will chronicle this period of time. And in studio today I have Brad Barr, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for the NOAA Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, and he will tell us about a project called the Lost Fleets of the Western Arctic, and what the National Marine Sanctuary System is doing to understand and appreciate this historically significant chapter in America's maritime history. Welcome, Brad, to the studio.
Thank you, Jim. Glad to be here.
Well, the obvious question is, what is the Lost Fleets of the Western Arctic project?
Well, you know, this is an interesting project for us. We're looking at this project as a way of understanding the maritime history of the United States, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, about why we're interested in that. But this whole project is about collecting and telling stories about the important maritime heritage activities, maritime heritage activities that exist in our history and why they're important, trying to remember what those messages are that we get. Some of the stories tell us about not only what happened then, but perhaps what happens now. They're the kind of things that help us to understand the people involved and what those people contributed to that maritime history. And it's about, and in many ways, it's about writing the final chapter of this story about whaling heritage in the Western Arctic, because it's a story that has a very rich content, but it also has never been. No one has ever gone back and looked at any of these wrecks, really been able to complete the story, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is to write the final chapter.
So why is NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries involved in this project?
Well, you know, the National Marine Sanctuary Program is a program that protects, manages, and conserves areas of the marine environment of special national significance. We have these are sites that are community-based management. We work with local communities a lot to try to establish what the appropriate management structure is. And we have about 13 national marine sanctuaries. They have 13 national marine sanctuaries around the country, everywhere from New England to American Samoa. The latest one is the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in Hawaii, in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. It's the second largest marine protected area, or fully protected marine area in the world. It's at about 100,000 square nautical miles. So it's a big area, and it's important for that regard. We have part of our jurisdiction is for protecting ecosystems, protecting natural areas, but also we're interested in protecting maritime heritage resources. The maritime heritage of the United States is an important part of our history, and we need to make sure that we understand and preserve those resources as well. And we have a big team of maritime historians and archaeologists that are working with us, that are helped to guide that part of our program. And in fact, they're working with the state of Alaska. You may have heard just recently about the work that the state of Alaska is doing to document the wreck of the vessel Torrent, which was a military personnel carrier, carried equipment and personnel. That we worked on a vessel called the Kadyak a couple of years ago with the state. It was a Russian trading vessel, and we just past that also worked on a vessel called the Hassler in the Lynn Canal. So we've been doing a lot of work with the state, and this is an opportunity for us to continue that work and expand it into these areas. You know, we have a number of sites within the National Marine Sanctuary System where whaling heritage is important. Clearly New England, and places like New Bedford and Nantucket. We have a site off of Boston called Stellwagen Bank Sanctuary. We have sites in Hawaii where whaling was also a big issue, was a big concern for the industry at a time, as was the West Coast, where we have a number of sites. So we're linking these sites together in terms of maritime heritage, and in order to tell the full story of the maritime heritage in the United States, you cannot ignore, you have to include the history, the maritime history, and the whaling history, whaling heritage of the Western Arctic.
And that's where the Western Arctic comes in.
And that's where the Western Arctic comes in, that's right.
So this period of time that we're talking about, can you give us some of the key events of the period?
The big event is the 1871 disaster. There were some 32 vessels that were caught in the ice. 31 were lost. This was all in the span of a week or so in September of 1871. There were 1,219 people, men, women, and children, because there were women and children on board these whaling vessels that were stranded. And through this very arduous process of dragging whaleboats across the ice, they were able to get all 1,219 people to safety, to the 7 vessels that were left in the fleet that were in the free water near the strait, and they took them to Honolulu, and they all survived. 6 years later, I'm sorry, 5 years later, in 1876, there was a similar sort of event where 20 ships were frozen in, 12 were lost, exactly the same area between Wainwright and the Seahorse Islands.
And that's where the weather piece comes into this, where it's a dangerous area for storms and for ice movement, and that sounds like it played a key role into those.
Absolutely.
events.
You know, what's really interesting about the weather thing is that you have anywhere in maritime history, weather is always an issue. When you have ships on the sea, you have gales, you have strong winds, you have rogue waves, you've got all those things. But in the Arctic, you've got one additional thing, and that's ice. And ice is the thing that really is a struggle, and certainly the weather is a major driver in all of this. I mean, it's the idea of being able to be frozen, your vessel to be frozen in where you cannot get out, is really easy to do. And you have to remember that this was towards the end. 1871, for example, was after 2/3 of the population of bowheads had been taken by commercial whalers. The population in the first 20 years, just a little less than 20 years, 2/3 of the population had been taken already. Whales were getting really hard to catch. They were getting really hard to find. And so whalers were taking more and more risks, staying later into the season, working earlier in the season, working in weather conditions that they wouldn't have worked in otherwise, because they needed to find those whales, and they were getting harder and harder to find. So the weather played an extremely important role in this.
We got about a minute, and I just wanted to touch quickly on the field surveys that you have planned.
Sure. We're hoping to have access to a vessel, which has been the big struggle for us. We want to do some seabed mapping up there to see if we can find some of the wrecks. Doing also from the air, doing something called LiDAR, which is light detection and ranging. It's done with lasers to also collect bottom topography. We also wanted to do some magnetometer data, magnetometer surveys, which give you the sense of what big pieces of metal, like the tripods from the whales, where the whale blubber was boiled down. I wanted to also mention that this is not just about the field surveys. This is also about a major education and outreach program that we have, where we're going to be doing we're hoping to be able to we have an ROV up there, a remotely operated vehicle that has cameras, a robot. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to try to beam by satellite live pictures from the ROV surveys and do some work to try to get those pictures out to the general public so everybody can see what we see in real time. And those are really exciting to do. We're also putting together content for the new Oceans Hall at the Smithsonian. The NOAA has a kiosk, and we've been invited to do some content for that. And we've got a lot of other education and outreach stuff that we're doing, trying to make sure that we can tell this story, because if you don't tell the story, nobody knows what it's all about and why we're going up there and doing this.
Outstanding, Brad. Thank you for coming in today, and good luck with the project.
Thank you, Jim.
And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Fact is, it's snowing in southeast. Looks like it's going to continue there. As you can see, the wind's a little bit out of sorts there in the vicinity of low pressure and a frontal boundary draped across the southern inner channels. 15 knots from the north and west coming down through the southern inner channels will produce 3-foot seas. Stronger northerly winds through the Lynn Canal and around the Stevens Passage and Fredericksburg Sound area. It looks like 20-knot winds there from the north and east with 4-foot seas, 7-foot seas in the north, and coastal areas will see 7 to 8-foot seas with 20 to 30-knot winds. As we get into Thursday, that south and southeasterly flow will continue up the coast with freezing spray remaining a threat. Northerly flow coming down the Lynn Canal and into the center parts of southeast with a northeasterly flow at 25 knots with a 5-foot sea, and southeasterlies taking shape across the southern inner channels with a 5-foot sea. In south central, north and northwesterly winds are pretty much taking over on Wednesday, and north flow coming down the Cook Inlet, picking up speed as it passes Kenai at 20 knots. Northwesterlies 30 to 35 knots coming across the Barren Islands at 30 knots as well. A northerly flow out of Resurrection Bay will produce 8-foot seas, and north and easterlies in and outside of Prince William Sound with some higher gusts there around the Copper River Basin. And remember, this is the same area we were talking about turbulence as far as aviation goes. North and easterly flow coming inside Prince William Sound on Thursday, still running around 20 knots or so. A northwesterly flow coming over the Barren Islands, 35 to 40 knots, so picking up a little speed there. Northerly still coming down the Cook Inlet, 15 to 25 knots with 4 to 5-foot seas. Freezing spray remains a threat in all of these areas, coming across Kodiak Island at 30 to 35 knots with 7-foot seas in Shelikof Strait and 9-foot seas east of Kodiak Island. Across the Alaska Peninsula, a north flow inside of Bristol Bay, 25 knots there with 6-foot seas. Northwesterlies crossing over the southern parts of the Alaska Peninsula. On both areas, it looks like 9-foot seas are possible. And outside of Kodiak Island and Chignik, northwesterlies 35 knots. 10-foot seas are expected with higher gusts coming off the peninsula. We'll continue that threat as we head into Thursday with wind speeds generally about the same, 35 to 40 knots. Freezing spray still likely across parts of the Bering Sea, and 11 to 12-foot seas on the Pacific side. Across the Aleutians, a west and northwesterly flow will continue across the Bering Sea side, 20 to 25 knots there with 7 to 8-foot seas east of Adak. And on the Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots there with seas still running around 8 to 9-foot seas, but westerlies will be maintained around Kiska, out toward Attu, 8 to 9-foot seas there on a 25-knot wind. You can see some changes taking place on Thursday. More of a southerly flow develops out toward Shemya, northwesterlies over Kiska, and a west and northwesterly flow continues for the central and eastern parts of the chain. Seas come up to 10 to 12 feet there, especially east and south of Atka, and 11 to 13 feet on the Bering Sea side for Thursday. Looking at the west coast, northerly winds around St. Lawrence Island continue, and the ice is moving in around Nunivak Island once again. South of that into the Kuskokwim Bay, we have 7-foot seas on a 25-knot wind. More northwesterly winds for the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea, and easterlies coming across the St. Matthew Island waters. Freezing spray will remain a threat as we head through Thursday. More of a northerly flow taking over all of the Bering Sea with 25 to 35-knot winds, and looking at 10-foot seas there south of Nunivak Island, 13-foot seas around the Pribilofs. For the Arctic coast, a north and northwesterly flow reaching toward Cape Lisburne and Point Hope at 25 knots. Northerlies will diminish somewhat across the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots there, looking for more of a east and northeasterly shift there across the Beaufort Sea tomorrow and into Thursday with a east to westerly flow across the Point Barrow and east and northeasterly winds coming into the Chukchi Sea at 15 to 25 knots before they turn northerly into Kotzebue Sound. Going back over your weather maps for tonight, snow will be heavy at times across parts of southern southeast. Winter storm warnings and advisories are posted for many areas there. Some places like Hyder could see upwards of 10 inches of snow. South Central still looking pretty dry but breezy. Snow showers possible in Kodiak and maybe outside of Prince William Sound. A cold front dropping southward across the Brooks Range will stir up the wind. Winter weather advisories there, and winter storm watch posted for Yakutat. We'll see you again right here tomorrow night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.